Peggy was our inspiration, mentor and guide, a role model for us girls. She never married, living with our grandmother in the house in which she was born, but she always used to say she was the most married person she knew, because she held such a central position in the lives of her nieces. To us, Peggy was Boadicea, a tall and splendid warrior, and after my father Jeremy died, she became capo di tutti, as the Italian mafia calls the head of the family. Her advice would be sought on every subject, from boyfriends to fashion, exams to job interviews, cooking to gardening. If things were going well, we wanted to tell Aunt Peggy, and if they weren't, she was the first port of call to talk things through. We 8 nieces would hang on her every word and carry out her advice to the letter. She has walked us up the aisle, accompanied us to nightclubs, been a travel companion, and an inveterate attender of exhibitions. She once even managed to get lost in the Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris, causing me to inform anyone who would listen, in my faltering French, j'ai perdu ma tante. Once found, she was taken into the bowels of that great building, escorted by 6 handsome firemen in full uniform, to be given peppermint-soaked sugar cubes by a nurse who looked like a caricature from a 1940s seaside postcard. Peggy's generosity, wit, intelligence and humour were awe-inspiring, but woe betide us if we hadn't read the newspapers, didn't know what she considered to be an important piece of general knowledge, or a matter of etiquette. If we committed what she believed to be an error of judgment, then no quarter was given. She was a critical friend when she needed to be, and why not? She didn't ask any more of us than she did of herself. What connects us all here today is a celebration of the life of this extraordinary woman, much loved by her family, including, of course, her sister-in-law Esquivel, as well as her friends, not least her oldest one, Penelope Citwell, with whom she was at school. She was also very close to her carers, Dawn and Kathy, who made her comfortable in her later years. Everyone has their own bond to Peggy, and their own stories about her, which can differ wildly from, she was very religious. She wasn't religious at all. She had a great respect for tradition. She was a renegade who never did what one expected. It appears that every statement about Peggy has its counter-opposite, and both are true. What is not in doubt is that she was a remarkable woman. Born in 1922, she lived through World War II, the landing on the moon, the invention of the atomic bomb and the World Wide Web, the growth and influence of social media, the invention of the contraceptive pill and the mobile phone, the first public television service, the invention of the credit card, the fall of the Berlin Wall. I could go on. And she kept abreast of all these seismic changes in global culture. Throughout all the years I knew her, she remained up to date with current thinking, always well read, with a view on the topics of the day, and interested in the opinions of a very much younger generation. Fascinated by the world around her, from the wildlife and plants in her garden to matters of state international, Peggy was connected to life, not only her own, but that of her family and her friends, both locally and much further afield. She has legions of admirers in Poland, which she used to visit regularly, and her fan base in South Africa resulted in a racehorse and a wine being named after her. There are so many hilarious stories about Aunt Peggy. One that I think will strike a chord with all of us is the fridge game. When a member of the family went to see Peggy at Wendover Farm, you would go into the fridge and throw away all the food that was past its sell-by date. And as soon as we left the kitchen, Aunt Peggy would retrieve everything from the dustbin and put it back in the fridge again. She was a really wonderful cook, and to my knowledge, no one suffered from the mirth. Peggy's house in Wendover was a truly welcoming home for everyone. Katerina remembers Peggy cooking Sunday lunch there, when she, her husband Mikey, and children, Gerald and Ella, all moved in while waiting for their house in Buckinghamshire to be ready. They loved living with her, and one of their abiding memories is of her bending over the stove, chain smoking while the ash fell into the gravy. She always served the meal in her mixed collection of dishes, pulling out the drawer at the end of the kitchen table to get the serving spoons. Anyone who knew Peggy will remember the Wendover kitchen table. Peggy had a marked eye for design and a wonderful taste. Her rooms were full of strong colours and patterns, so individual in their conception and yet so comfortable. Christmases at Wendover were wonderful. As Elizabeth remembers, Peggy would decorate the whole house with holly and create fantastic decorations on the mantelpiece. She always put up old crepe friezes around the dining room, like the one of the fox chasing the goose. When Elizabeth was living at Wendover, she was astounded by the hundreds of Christmas cards that arrived for Peggy. As she looked rather forlornly on her one and only RBS card, she felt sure Peggy was pulling out the old ones to dress the house up. But no, they were all from that year. Lucinda remembers Peggy's wonderful sense of occasion. A treasured memory is of her and her children Victoria and Alexandra coming down for breakfast on one of their birthdays to find that their place setting had been decorated with a circle of flowers from the garden. It's a tradition that goes on in Lucinda's house to this day. Ella Barron fondly remembers Peggy telling her stories as they walked up the garden with the dogs, weeding the flower beds as they went. Peggy adored animals, from the birds in the garden, which she watched from the conservatory with her bird book and binoculars, to dogs, donkeys, and horses. She started breeding horses when she was just 18. Her horse, Harry Lyme, earned her the right to join the jockey club as an owner. She was the only owner in the jockey club for a very long time, but they loved her. When she went back to visit the club in her 80s, all the members stood and raised a glass to her. As Lucy recalls, she loved the Grand National and studied the racing form meticulously. She always had a party on the day with sweepstakes. Her dogs, Suki, Ollie, Lucky, Boot, Slipper, Chaucer, Minouche, and Joby were all important members of the family, along with her two favourite birds, Ockham and Odo. Later on, there was an addition, an aggressive bird that joined the others, who was known as Sid Vicious. We all remember Peggy leaning on the fence at the top of the garden and looking into the woods, across the farm and down the valley, and then turning back to the house and collecting rhubarb or something for supper on the way. And then we'd sit at the kitchen with a pot of tea, Ockham squawking in the cage, and suddenly the click of the latch door would herald the arrival of friends, neighbours, or family popping in. Having adjourned to the pink room, where the fire would be lit, Aunt Peggy sat in her favourite armchair, her long legs crossed and a drink in hand, leaning in to ask, "So tell me," to get the latest update. On hearing the gossip, she would shout, "No!" in disbelief and glee. "I don't believe it." Her tongue curled back as she laughed, sending the end of her cigarette sailing over the heads of sleeping dogs, seated children, and highly flammable antiques into the night. Many of Peggy's best stories about herself will be recognisable just from their titles. The time I was mistaken for a hitchhiker on an aeroplane. The time I rescued Lucky from the gypsies. The time I woke up to find a chimpanzee in my bed. The time I rode my horse through Chequers and was introduced to Churchill, for whom she used to buy and sell furniture. The time I met Gandhi as a child. I think he touched her head and blessed her. Oh, and of course, the one about her family doctor, who was a great friend of Einstein and used to ride around the park with him for hours in deep discussion. But he always had to pay the tip because Einstein couldn't work out the basic percentage. This one was always told as a reassuring tale to any child who was having trouble with their maths homework. But perhaps the most legendary story is this. In December 1984, Margaret Thatcher welcomed several senior Soviet figures to Chequers estate, including reformist Mikhail Gorbachev, an up-and-coming politician at the time, who would go on to become the Soviet Union's last president in 1990, before its dissolution. Gorbachev's visit to Chequers was a very important moment in history, since it heralded the end of the Cold War. Running parallel to this was Peggy's dilemma about the rabbits at Wendover. They had taken over the place and were running wild. She persuaded Wendover's head policeman, P.C. Watson, to come over when needed, to keep the population down, as he was a very good shot. Unbeknown to her, P.C. Watson had been promoted and was now responsible for the detail commissioned to protect the Prime Minister during the Gorbachev visit. The very same weekend that the Russian delegate arrived, Peggy decided that she'd had enough of the rabbits eating everything in sight and rang the station. "I need to speak to P.C. Watson. I'm sorry, madam, but he's busy. Could you please call back?" "Well, all right," says Peggy, "but it's a bit of an emergency." So Peggy waited a few hours, but no call from P.C. Watson, so she rang back. "Now look here, it's absolutely urgent. You have to understand, the rabbits are overrunning the place, and he needs to come right away." Within less than 20 minutes, Peggy suddenly hears the whooshing of helicopter blades and wailing sirens. Rather alarmed, she goes outside to be met by P.C. Watson. "Are you all right?" he says with great concern. "Well, I'm glad you're taking it rather seriously, Peggy replied. You know, they really are a nuisance." P.C. Watson looked at her and then laughed with relief. He'd assumed that Peggy was in mortal danger, since the password that Chequers was using for an enemy attack was rabbits. When Peggy was dying, I couldn't be with her because I was isolated with COVID. Thinking of her and imagining being with her, I understood for the first time the concept of the eternity of the spirit. Death would allow her spirit to be free again, as the pure essence of who she was. And this essence would become part of me, and all of us who chose it to be. For me, Peggy's death signifies the passing of the baton, the handing over to her nieces and to her great, as well as great-great-nieces and nephews, the qualities that we have witnessed in our aunt, her values, the lessons she taught us, which we're celebrating in this service today. It's perhaps why each of us recognize in our aunt the aspects of her character that we can most relate to in our own, and in our different memories and recollections are the various pieces that make up our Aunt Peggy. However, the passing of the baton brings the painful realization that we no longer have Aunt Peggy as our shield. Now we must uphold the values that she taught us. We must reflect on those teachings and take them into the world as our way of honouring her memory and what she stood for, as a strong, independent woman who was ahead of her time. This is a daunting task, but one we must accept if we are to fully recognise everything she did for us while we were growing up, to make us the people we are today. We must go forward, remembering our ancestors, our parents, and our grandmother, who is buried in the graveyard here. And when we miss her, we can imagine her telling us, as Christopher Robin said to Winnie the Pooh, "If there is ever a tomorrow when we're not together, there is something you must always remember. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. But the most important thing is, even if we are apart, I'll always be with you."